Welcome back, dear viewers, to part 2 of the series all about the Crusades, the War for the Holy Land, brought to you by the creator of Mysteries Beyond the Veil. In this episode, we'll explore the major events of the First Crusade, the formation of the Crusader states, and the key incidents that eventually sparked the outbreak of the Second Crusade. This series summarizes essential historical details about the Crusades, written and presented by Mysteries Beyond the Veil. We hope you'll support this journey through history, and now let's dive right into part 2 of the series. From Constantinople to Antioch, by late May of 1097, the Crusader army, along with a supporting force from the Byzantine Empire, advanced toward the Seljuk capital of Nicaea, now known as Iznik in modern-day Turkey. After a period of siege, the city surrendered and was handed back to the Byzantines on June 19th. Just a week later, on June 26th, the Crusaders departed from Nicaea and began their grueling march toward Antioch. Their path led them through the harsh and arid lands of Anatolia, an unforgiving landscape of scorching heat and treacherous mountains. Each step forward was a test of endurance, as if fate itself were putting the Crusaders to trial. On July 1st, 1097, at Dorylaeum, the Crusader vanguard was ambushed by Seljuk forces. Despite a storm of arrows under the blazing sun, they stood their ground with unwavering courage. When the rest of the Crusader forces arrived to reinforce them, they launched a coordinated counterattack that shattered the Turkish lines. It was the Crusaders' first major open-field victory, an inspiring testament to the power of unity among the diverse Western armies and their Byzantine allies. A rare moment when faith, strategy, and bravery fused into one. But the road deeper into Anatolia grew only more difficult. Rugged terrain, punishing weather, and severe shortages of food and water led to devastating losses. Especially while crossing the formidable Taurus Mountains, it wasn't until October 20th that the exhausted army finally reached the outskirts of Antioch. Antioch was a vital crossroads where Greek, Arab, and Armenian worlds converged. As the main Crusader forces approached the city, Baldwin, the younger brother of Godfrey of Bouillon, broke away to involve himself in the political turmoil unfolding in the Armenian territories. Through a series of strategic alliances and skillful diplomacy, Baldwin swiftly established himself as the ruler of Edessa, a crucial region to the east of Antioch. The founding of the county of Edessa marked the establishment of the very first Crusader state in the east. More than just a political achievement, Edessa served as a vital buffer zone, protecting Antioch and other Christian territories from Seljuk raids coming from the northeast. Returning now to Antioch, one of the most renowned cities of the Levant and one of the 4 ancient patriarchates of Christendom. The city was fortified by a massive defensive wall, featuring over 400 watchtowers standing guard. The siege of this mighty stronghold began in earnest. Although the Crusaders received reinforcements and supplies from Genoese and English ships, as well as support from the Patriarch of Jerusalem, the campaign was brutally long and difficult. Famine and disease swept through the camp, claiming the lives of countless soldiers and civilians alike. As spring approached, so did disaster. With the arrival of spring, danger grew ever closer. A massive relief army led by Kerboga, the powerful Atabeg of Mosul, was marching toward Antioch. The situation grew so dire that some Crusader soldiers deserted and tried to flee. Among them was none other than Peter the Hermit, once a symbol of faith and the crusading cause. However, he was captured on the road, quietly returned to camp, and secretly forgiven. Another deserter, the French knight Stephen of Blois, was less fortunate. Cut off by Kerboga's advancing forces, he had no chance of returning to the main army. Seeing the dire circumstances, Stephen became convinced that the crusade had failed. On his journey home, he encountered Emperor Alexios I Komnenos, who was leading a Byzantine force to reinforce the Crusaders. Stephen convinced the emperor that Antioch had already fallen and that any rescue attempt would be futile. As a result, Alexios chose to retreat. Though the emperor's decision may have made military sense, it turned out to be a major diplomatic blunder. When word of Alexios's withdrawal reached the Crusader camp, they immediately considered their previous pledge to return Antioch to the Byzantine Empire null and void. From that moment on, the balance of power in the east began to shift. The lofty ideals of faith and religious mission slowly gave way to the pursuit of land, glory, and personal ambition. At the heart of this turning point was Bohemond, the cunning Norman leader. Sensing opportunity, he made a bold proposal. Whoever is the first to enter the city shall claim it, so long as the Byzantine emperor does not appear. It was more than just a tactical move. It was a silent challenge to Alexios, whom Bohemond now saw as having abandoned the Crusader cause. The fall and siege of Antioch. In truth, Bohemond had been secretly communicating with a discontented commander within the city of Antioch. On the night of June 3, 1098, while the city slept under the illusion of its impenetrable walls, that commander quietly opened a passage for Bohemond to climb inside. Seizing the moment, the other Crusader lords swiftly followed. Like a sudden flood, they poured into Antioch. The city fell quickly. Most of the defenders were caught off guard and put up only weak resistance. Only the citadel, an imposing fortress perched high above, remained in Muslim hands. Still, the rest of Antioch, once a dazzling jewel of the East, had returned to Christian control. It was a defining moment in the Crusade. Antioch was now back in the hands of Christendom, but the victory was far from complete. Just days after the Crusaders captured the city, Kerboga arrived at its gates with a vast Muslim army from Mosul and laid siege to Antioch in turn. Inside the walls, the Crusaders were nearly out of food, exhausted from months of warfare, and now trapped in the very city they had just taken. Hope seemed all but lost. Divisions among the Crusader leaders deepened, and confusion reigned. Then came a bizarre twist. A priest from Provence declared that he had discovered the Holy Lance, the very spear that pierced the side of Christ on the cross, buried beneath the cathedral floor. Some took it as a divine sign, others suspected it was fabricated, a desperate attempt to boost morale. But whether truth or myth, the symbol inspired action. On June 28, 1098, the Crusaders made a bold decision to sally forth and face Kerboga in open battle. The Turkish forces, though massive, were poorly disciplined and fractured by internal rivalries. They were unprepared for the sudden unity and fury of the Crusader assault. Chaos spread through Kerboga's army. His lines crumbled, and once again he watched his army vanish like dust in the wind. Soon after, the last defenders in the citadel surrendered. They were allowed to leave in peace, and the city was fully under Crusader control. But triumph was short-lived. A terrible plague swept through the weakened Crusader ranks, killing thousands, including Adhemar of Lapuy, the papal legate and spiritual leader of the Crusade. His death left a deep void, just as tensions among the leaders were beginning to grow once more. Following the hard-fought victory at Antioch, the Crusader leaders fell into bitter dispute over the fate of the city. Bohemond, who had masterminded its capture and successfully led the defense against Kerboga's forces, demanded to keep Antioch as his rightful prize. But Raymond of St. Gilles, ever loyal to Emperor Alexios, insisted that the city be returned to the Byzantine Empire, as originally promised at the outset of the campaign. This deadlock brought the crusade to a grinding halt. Neither leader would back down, and both refused to press onward toward Jerusalem. The once glorious army, which had survived starvation, disease, and countless battles, now found itself paralyzed, stuck in a ruined city, braving the harshness of winter while its leaders argued over spoils. Watching their lords quarrel over power and promises, the rank-and-file soldiers, those who had suffered the most, finally reached their breaking point. Outraged, they threatened to tear down Antioch's walls themselves unless the march to the Holy City resumed. Faced with this revolt, the lords were forced to act. On January 13, 1099, the army at last departed Antioch, now led by Raymond of St. Gilles. Though frustrated, he was still the only leader with enough respect and authority to guide the remaining forces. As the Crusaders marched southward, they were gradually joined by Tancred, Robert of Normandy, Godfrey of Bouillon, and Robert of Flanders. Bohemond, however, chose to stay behind, refusing to honor his oath to the emperor. He claimed Antioch as his own, laying the foundations for one of the first Crusader states in the east, the Principality of Antioch. The final march, Siege of Jerusalem. The Crusaders' final destination was now in sight, Jerusalem. But the Holy City was no longer held by their traditional enemy, the Seljuk Turks. Since August 1098, it had fallen under the control of the Fatimids, Shia Muslims who ruled from Cairo and were fierce rivals of the Sunni Seljuks and the caliphs in Baghdad. This twist meant that the final chapter of the First Crusade was no longer a campaign against the Turks, but instead against fellow Muslims, Egyptians of a different sect. The war for Jerusalem was no longer just a clash of religions between Christianity and Islam. It had become a collision point between rival Islamic powers, with the Crusaders caught in the middle, acting both as outsiders and opportunistic conquerors. Weary, fractured, but still driven by faith and thirst for glory, the Crusader army pushed onward. On June 7, 1099, a force of just 1,200 to 1,500 cavalry and around 12,000 infantry set up camp outside the walls of Jerusalem. Inside, the Fatimid governor, well stocked with provisions and confident in his defenses, believed he could hold out until reinforcements arrived from Egypt. The Crusaders, on the other hand, were running desperately low on supplies. Salvation came just in time. 6 ships from Genoa docked at the port of Jaffa, delivering vital goods before the Egyptian navy could blockade the coast. On June 8th, a solemn procession took place. While Muslim defenders mocked from atop the walls, the entire Crusader army, led by priests, marched barefoot around the city in a ritual of fasting and prayer. They then climbed the Mount of Olives, where Peter the Hermit, the same man who had once ignited the spirit of the crusade, rose once more to speak, his voice aflame with the same passion that had launched the journey years ago. By now, Jerusalem was far more than just a military objective. It had become the embodiment of divine mission, of forgiveness, of salvation. It was a sacred prize for which thousands had suffered and died, a symbol of hope, redemption, and the eternal glory they had chased across continents for over 3 grueling years of war. The fall of Jerusalem between June 13th and 14th, 1099, the great siege towers were rolled into place, pressing against Jerusalem's walls amid thunderous shouts and a storm of arrows. On July 15th, after over a month of brutal siege, Godfrey of Bouillon's troops finally breached a section of the walls. Crusaders scaled the battlements using ladders, while others forced open the nearest gate. Tancred and Raymond led the charge as waves of Christian soldiers flooded into the city. Seeing the situation was hopeless, the Fatimid governor surrendered honorably to Raymond at the Tower of David. In accordance with the customs of war, he and his personal guard were escorted safely out of the city. But peace did not come with victory. In a desperate attempt to protect civilians, Tancred had promised sanctuary to those seeking refuge in the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Yet, his command was ignored. In the fire and fury of fanatic triumph, hundreds, men, women, children, Muslim and Jewish alike, fell to the Crusaders' swords in a massacre that even the victors could not fully control. It was a victory that history cannot describe with glory alone. In the blood-red twilight of the Holy City, the laurel wreath on the conqueror's head was soaked in tears. And yet, after 3 long years crossing unforgiving mountains, arid deserts, starvation, disease, and bitter divisions, the Crusader armies had achieved their most sacred goal. Jerusalem was once again under Christian control. They had accomplished the impossible, defeating mighty armies of Turks and Arabs, crossing thousands of miles from Europe to the Levant, and seizing 2 of the most heavily fortified cities of the age, Antioch and Jerusalem. From a modern perspective, the First Crusade's success seems absurd. A campaign plagued by poor organization, internal rivalries, supply shortages, and relentless threats. But to the people of the Middle Ages, victory was not merely a matter of tactics or numbers. It was divine intervention. It was God himself, they believed, who had performed miracle after miracle, guiding his faithful knights to triumph. And it was that same belief that they were instruments of God's will that would fuel generation after generation of crusaders, igniting wars that would not only reshape the Middle East, but forever alter the history of Europe and Asia alike. The aftermath, a kingdom born of faith and fire. A sudden and decisive strike against the Egyptian reinforcements solidified Crusader control over the entire region of Palestine. Their pilgrimage, as promised, was complete. With Jerusalem secured, most of the knights, battle-weary and longing for home, began their return to Europe. But behind them, a lingering question remained. who would govern the lands they had just conquered. Though the Holy City now belonged to Christendom, ruling such a sacred and volatile place would not be simple. From the outset, opinions diverged. Some believed Jerusalem should be governed by the Church, as a pure symbol of faith, untouched by worldly politics. Others, especially the noblemen who had bled on its walls, insisted that a secular state was necessary to defend and administer the territory. As a temporary solution, one of the Crusades' most respected leaders, Godfrey of Bouillon, was chosen to lead. But in a gesture of humility and reverence, he refused the title of king, declaring instead that he would be defender of the Holy Sepulchre, a protector, not a monarch of the sacred city. Power had been claimed, yet the new state lacked a firm foundation. In those uncertain early years after the conquest, the Kingdom of Jerusalem was born, a Christian stronghold in the heart of the Islamic world. Its creation marked the beginning of a new and far more complex chapter in the story of the Crusades, one shaped by faith, ambition, diplomacy, and continuous conflict. In December of 1099, as tensions still simmered and the shape of governance remained uncertain, Bohemond of Antioch and Baldwin of Boulogne finally arrived in Jerusalem to fulfill their sacred vow. With them came Dagobert, the influential Archbishop of Pisa, and a powerful voice within the Western Church. Dagobert was soon appointed Patriarch of Jerusalem, receiving official recognition from both Baldwin and Godfrey. This move appeared to pave the way for a theocratic rule, where the Church would guide the destiny of the Holy City. Yet if Dagobert once dreamed of ruling Jerusalem as a kind of miniature pope, that dream was swiftly extinguished. Not long after Godfrey's death, the people and nobles of the city summoned Baldwin back to Jerusalem. On November 11, 1100, Baldwin was crowned King Baldwin I of Jerusalem. With that act, the Holy City was no longer a spiritual dominion governed by the Church like a little Vatican. It had officially become a European-style feudal kingdom, laying the foundation for a Christian monarchy that would endure for nearly 2 centuries. And so, what had begun as a pilgrimage fueled by divine yearning, the First Crusade, concluded not in pure spiritual triumph, but with the birth of a secular state. A kingdom with a crown and a court with lords, castles, and the inevitable entanglement of faith and ambition, all beneath the shadow of the sacred. But this was only the overture to a long and turbulent symphony. Jerusalem, holy and coveted, would never again rest peacefully beneath a single banner. Fortresses and frontiers, the Crusader states take shape. Consolidating the newly conquered Christian territories now became a top priority. To reinforce control over the Holy Land, Pope Paschal II launched a new crusade in 1100. However, this expedition quickly collapsed in Asia Minor, where the Western armies were decisively defeated by the Turks. Yet, despite these setbacks, King Baldwin I of Jerusalem continued to reap strategic gains. While rival Muslim dynasties were locked in power struggles, Baldwin expanded his influence steadily along the Levantine coast, aided significantly by European naval powers, especially the Italians. In a rare moment of cross-continental support, an entire Norwegian fleet, led by King Sigurd, arrived to reinforce the Latin cause. With this backing, Baldwin captured key port cities including Arsuf, Caesarea, Acre, Beirut, and Sidon. By 1112, nearly the entire coastline of what is now Israel, Lebanon, and parts of Syria had fallen to the Latins, with only Ascalon and Tyre still in Muslim hands. Jerusalem was no longer a lonely kingdom marooned in the desert. It had become a maritime power, closely tied to Europe through sea-based trade and military routes. Meanwhile, numerous fortresses were erected across the region of Galilee, and the southern frontiers gradually pushed deeper into Muslim-held territories. To the north, the first of the Crusader principalities began to take shape. Among them was the county of Edessa, the first Latin state to emerge in the east, though its borders were vague and stretched deep into the upper Euphrates Valley, in present-day Turkey and Syria. The local population was mostly Armenian and Syriac Christian, followers of Eastern Orthodoxy, distinct from the Latin Roman Church. Originally, the county was founded and controlled by Baldwin of Boulogne, brother of Godfrey of Bouillon, after he broke away from the main Crusader army in 1098. When Baldwin left Edessa to ascend the throne of Jerusalem in 1100, he passed control of the county to his cousin, Baldwin of Bourg, who ruled it nominally as a vassal. From then on, Edessa served both as a vital northern bulwark for the Latin states and a launchpad for deeper incursions into Muslim territory. Consolidating the newly conquered Christian territories now became a top priority. To reinforce control over the Holy Land, Pope Paschal VI launched a new crusade in 1100. However, this expedition quickly collapsed in Asia Minor, where the Western armies were decisively defeated by the Turks. Yet despite these setbacks, King Baldwin I of Jerusalem continued to reap strategic gains. While rival Muslim dynasties were locked in power struggles, Baldwin expanded his influence steadily along the Levantine coast, aided significantly by European naval powers, especially the Italians. In a rare moment of cross-continental support, an entire Norwegian fleet, led by King Sigurd, arrived to reinforce the Latin cause. With this backing, Baldwin captured key port cities including Arsuf, Caesarea, Acre, Beirut, and Sidon. By 1112, nearly the entire coastline of what is now Israel, Lebanon, and parts of Syria had fallen to the Latins, with only Ascalon and Tyre still in Muslim hands. Jerusalem was no longer a lonely kingdom marooned in the desert. It had become a maritime power, closely tied to Europe through sea-based trade and military routes. Meanwhile, numerous fortresses were erected across the region of Galilee, and the southern frontiers gradually pushed deeper into Muslim-held territories. To the north, the first of the Crusader principalities began to take shape. Among them was the county of Edessa, the first Latin state to emerge in the east, though its borders were vague and stretched deep into the upper Euphrates Valley, in present-day Turkey and Syria. The local population was mostly Armenian and Syriac Christian, followers of Eastern Orthodoxy, distinct from the Latin Roman Church. Originally, the county was founded and controlled by Baldwin of Boulogne, brother of Godfrey of Bouillon, after he broke away from the main Crusader army in 1098. When Baldwin left Edessa to ascend the throne of Jerusalem in 1100, he passed control of the county to his cousin, Baldwin of Bourg, who ruled it nominally as a vassal. From then on, Edessa served both as a vital northern bulwark for the Latin states and a launchpad for deeper incursions into Muslim territory, an uneasy frontier. Antioch and the fragile edges of Latin power. Despite its early establishment, the county of Edessa remained inherently unstable. Its remote geography, isolation, and non-Latin Christian majority rendered it vulnerable, more a stepping stone than a secure stronghold, poised on the path of greater upheavals to come. Meanwhile, Antioch, although originally promised to be returned to the Byzantine Empire, was never restored. Instead, Bohemond of Taranto rapidly consolidated his hold on the city. Antioch's population was a complex mosaic of Greek Orthodox, Syriac, and Armenian Christians, and tensions between the Eastern Greek Church and the Western Latin Church began to simmer dangerously when Bohemond deposed the Greek patriarch and replaced him with a Latin appointee. In 1100, when Bohemond was captured by Muslim forces, his nephew Tancred assumed the regency and continued Antioch's territorial expansion. In 1103, Tancred seized the port of Latakia from the Byzantines, an escalation that further strained already fraught relations with Constantinople. After his release in 1103, Bohemond returned to Europe, where he successfully persuaded Pope Paschal II to sanction a new crusade. But rather than confronting Islam, Bohemond redirected his ambitions toward the Byzantine Empire, launching an attack on Dyrrhachium, modern Durrës in Albania. This campaign echoed his earlier defeat in 1082 and ended in similar failure. In 1108, Bohemond was forced to swear fealty to the Byzantine emperor and acknowledge Antioch as a vassal state of Constantinople. Disgraced, he returned to Italy and died in 1111. A fourth Crusader state emerged along the Mediterranean coast, the county of Tripoli, founded by Raymond of St. Gilles. Once sidelined from the power struggles in Jerusalem, Raymond had returned to Constantinople, seeking aid from the Byzantine emperor, to whom he had remained staunchly loyal. In 1102, Raymond re-entered Syria, captured Tortosa, and laid siege to Tripoli. The campaign was long and arduous. Raymond died in 1105, with the city still unconquered, leaving his ambitions unfulfilled. It was only years later that Tripoli finally fell, and the territory was firmly incorporated as the Fourth Crusader Principality in the Levant, the final piece in the Latin patchwork of Eastern Mediterranean holdings. Together, Antioch, Jerusalem, Edessa, and Tripoli came to be known collectively as the Outramar, the lands beyond the sea. These were to form the stage for over a century of conflict, alliance, and betrayal among kings, bishops, warlords, and sword-bearing pilgrims. The defense and consolidation of these new Crusader states quickly became a matter of survival. Geography and the complex political mosaic of the Islamic Near East presented constant threats. From Antioch in the north to Jerusalem in the south, the Franks controlled a narrow strip of coastal territory, squeezed between mountain ranges to the west and the Jordan Valley to the east, with the vast Syrian desert beyond. Surrounding them were formidable Muslim strongholds: Aleppo, Hama, and Damascus, each a powerful center capable of threatening the fragile Crusader realms at any time. Though the Crusaders pressed as far south as Ayla, or modern-day Aqaba, all attempts to expand eastward ultimately failed. In response, they were forced to establish a network of defensive fortresses not only along the coastline, but also at strategic points on the eastern frontier. Among the most notable were Castle Montreal, Crac de Montreal in the Shawback region of the Jordan Valley, and the formidable Crac des Chevaliers, the impregnable stronghold of the Knights Hospitaller in Tripoli. These were monuments to both the Frankish military willpower and the architectural ingenuity of Crusader defense in the east. Meanwhile, the Islamic world remained deeply divided. Egypt was under the Shia Fatimid Caliphate, Baghdad remained loyal to the Sunni Abbasid Caliphate, and many minor states in between lingered in indecision. The northern Muslim principalities feared the growing strength of the Seljuks at Iconium, resulting in a chaotic political landscape that offered breathing space for the Crusader states to consolidate. Upon the death of Baldwin I in 1118, the crown of Jerusalem passed to his cousin Baldwin of Labourg, now Baldwin II, who relinquished his position as Count of Edessa and entrusted the county to his kinsman, Jocelyn of Courtenay. In the early years of Baldwin VI's reign, the Franks continued to expand. In 1124, with naval support from the Venetians, they captured the city of Tyre, the last major Muslim-held port north of Ascalon. Following tradition, Venice was granted half the city, reflecting the increasing presence and influence of European maritime powers in the Levant. After Baldwin II's death, the crown passed to Fulk of Anjou, a French noble who had not participated in the First Crusade but was recommended by King Louis VI of France. To legitimize his rule, Fulk married Melisende, the daughter of Baldwin VI. This marked a significant turning point. The throne of Jerusalem no longer belonged to the battle-hardened Crusaders from the first expedition, but had passed into the hands of ambitious dynasties, closely connected to European royalty. Fulk's reign signaled a shift from territorial expansion to the stabilization of borders, a pragmatic strategy aligned with the times, as his reign coincided with the rise of Zengi, the powerful Atabeg of Mosul, and one of Islam's most formidable champions in the Holy War against the Franks. Zengi was unlike the fragmented and suspicious Muslim lords before him. He was a military genius, driven by a vision to unite the Islamic world and reclaim the lands taken by the Crusaders. As Zengi turned his eyes toward Damascus, the political landscape grew dangerously unstable. The local Muslim rulers, already wary of centralized power, now feared they would be consumed by the same ambition that aimed to destroy the Crusader states. The Kingdom of Jerusalem now stood on the brink of encirclement. In a surprising turn of events, the Muslim rulers of Damascus and the Christian Franks of Jerusalem formed an unlikely alliance, united not by faith but by political necessity to resist the looming threat of Zengi. This pragmatic coalition exemplified the realpolitik of the second-generation Franks in the Levant. No longer driven by religious zeal like their Crusader forebears, these rulers understood the rules of local power. The enemy of my enemy can be my greatest ally. Yet even as the Crusader states struggled to preserve an unstable peace, Zengi inched ever closer to his first great objective, Edessa, the most distant, isolated, and vulnerable of the four Latin states. While Jerusalem focused on fortifying its southern front and maneuvering diplomatically, the northern Crusader states teetered on the edge of collapse. At the same time, the Byzantine Empire, having regained strength in Asia Minor, began reasserting its influence over Armenia and Antioch, territories that had operated semi-independently under Crusader control, but technically remained under imperial dominion. The ambitious and astute Emperor Manuel Komnenos pressured Prince Raymond of Antioch into acknowledging Byzantine suzerainty, undermining the political autonomy of the Frankish nobility in the Levant. However, the gravest threat did not come from Constantinople, but from the east, where Zengi's sword burned with holy fire. In 1144, he launched a lightning assault on Edessa, the Crusader state most isolated and ill-defended. In mere days, Edessa fell. The loss was not just a military catastrophe. It was a devastating blow to the morale, faith, and honor of Christian Europe. All attempts to retake the city ended in failure. Thus, Edessa, the first Crusader state to be established, became the first to fall. News of the disaster reverberated from Paris to Rome like a funeral bell. The crusading fever ignited once more, but this time it would not be led by nameless knights seeking glory. Instead, kings themselves would take the cross. The Second Crusade was about to begin, more ambitious, more glorious, and ultimately more tragic than the first. And that marks the end of Part 1 in our historical journey through the Crusades. Stay tuned for Part 2, where powerful monarchs rise, empires collide, and destiny is written in the sands of the Holy Land. Thank you for watching until the end of the video. If you found it interesting, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next mysteries waiting beyond the veil. See you in the next mysterious journey.